Hello, and welcome to Cognitive Drift. There is a strange protective layer that wraps around religious belief, a kind of social agreement that says we shouldn't poke too hard at the foundations of someone's faith. We are told that faith is a virtue and that doubt is a weakness. But in every other aspect of our lives, politics, science, finance, relationships, we demand evidence. We ask questions. We scrutinize the details because we want to know what is true, not just what makes us feel good. When we apply that same standard of honest, rigorous questioning to the core claims of Christianity, cracks begin to appear. These aren't just nitpicks about translation errors or historical dates. They are fundamental issues that strike at the very logic of the theology. And deep down, many believers know these questions exist. They just fear where the answers might lead. We have to start with the most obvious and painful contradiction, one that has unsettled minds for thousands of years: the reality of suffering. We aren't talking about the suffering caused by human choices, like war or crime, which is usually dismissed with the free will defense. We are talking about gratuitous, natural suffering. Consider a fawn caught in a forest fire, suffering for days in agony before dying alone, with no human around to learn a lesson from it. Or consider the parasitic worm, Loa Loa, which evolved specifically to burrow into the eyes of humans and animals. If the Christian God is the architect of all nature, he designed that worm. He calibrated the heat of the fire. Why would a loving designer build a system that runs on so much pointless agony? If he could not create a world without this suffering, he is not all-powerful. If he could but chose not to, he is not all-loving. This is the corner that logic paints us into, and there is no easy way out. This leads us directly into the issue of divine intervention. We are told that God interacts with the world, that he answers prayers and guides history. But when we look at the data, the intervention seems suspiciously indistinguishable from random chance. Take the efficacy of prayer. We have studied this. When sick patients are prayed for, their recovery rates are statistically identical to those who are not prayed for. In fact, in some studies, those who knew they were being prayed for actually did worse, likely due to performance anxiety. If God is a loving father who listens to his children, why is the line dead whenever we set up a controlled test? It raises the uncomfortable question of why God's actions always hide in the margins of statistical noise, never clear, never undeniable, always requiring an excuse. And speaking of undeniable proof, we have to look at the concept of divine hiddenness. If the most important thing a human being can do is know and love this Creator to save their eternal soul, why is the Creator playing hide and seek? A relationship requires two parties. If you had a father who never spoke to you, never showed his face, and only left you a collection of contradictory letters written by other people thousands of years ago, you wouldn't call that a relationship. You would call it abandonment. Why would a God who wants a relationship with us make his existence so ambiguous that reasonable, honest people can look at the evidence and conclude he isn't there? It seems like a rigged game to punish someone for using the very brain they were given. This brings us to the geography of salvation. This is a simple matter of looking at a map. The single biggest predictor of your religion is not your research, your logic, or your personal revelation. It is where you were born and what your parents believed. If you are born in rural Afghanistan, you are Muslim. If you are born in Alabama, you are Christian. If you are born in Thailand, you are Buddhist. If Christianity is the only exclusive truth, the only narrow path to heaven, then God has set up a system where 99% of people born in India are doomed simply because of their zip code. Does that sound like the justice of a supreme moral being? Or does it sound like the cultural transmission of human mythology? We have to talk about the source material itself. The Bible is held up as the perfect Word of God, the ultimate moral guide. But when we actually read it, Without the filter of a sermon, we find things that no modern Christian would accept. Slavery is the big one. We aren't talking about indentured servitude or working off a debt. Leviticus 25 is explicit. It allows you to buy people from the nations around you, to own them as property, and to pass them down to your children as an inheritance. It even tells you how severely you can beat them. If God is the source of objective morality, and morality doesn't change, then owning humans is still moral. If slavery is wrong now, then God was wrong then. You cannot have it both ways, and trying to justify it by saying, "It was a different time," is a relativist argument that surrenders the claim of objective divine morality. The confusion continues when we look at the history of the text. We don't have the original writings of the New Testament. We have copies of copies of copies, written decades after the events they describe, by anonymous authors who were not eyewitnesses, in a language Jesus didn't speak. There are more variations in the manuscripts we have than there are words in the New Testament. If this book is the sole lifeline for humanity, the instruction manual for escaping eternal fire, why did God allow the transmission of the text to be so messy and human? Why not preserve it perfectly? Why allow verses to be added or changed by scribes later on, which historians acknowledge happened? It looks exactly like a human book, not a divine one. And what about the central villain of the story? The concept of hell is perhaps the most psychologically damaging idea ever invented. We are asked to believe that a loving father would create a basement torture chamber for his children. The punishment is infinite, eternal conscious torment. Yet the crimes committed by humans are finite. Even a mass murderer only does a finite amount of harm in a finite lifetime. How is infinite punishment for a finite crime justice? It isn't. It is vengeance. If a human father locked his child in a burning room forever because they disobeyed or didn't love him enough, we would call the police. We would call him a monster. Yet we are asked to call this God good. This leads to a question about God's psychology, specifically, his need for praise. The Bible describes a God who is jealous, who demands worship, who wants glory. But why? An all-powerful, perfect being lacks nothing. He shouldn't have needs. A being that needs constant validation from inferior creatures sounds incredibly insecure, shockingly human. It projects our own ego onto the cosmos. Why would the creator of 100 billion galaxies care if a primate on a rock puts their hands in the air and sings a song about how great he is? It diminishes the grandeur of a supposed God to make him so emotionally needy. Let's look inward at our own minds, the soul. Christianity relies on the idea that we have an immaterial soul that survives death. But everything we know about neuroscience tells us that you are your brain. We can pinpoint the parts of the brain that control personality, memory, impulse control, and fear. When the brain is damaged, the person changes. If you damage the frontal lobe, a calm person becomes aggressive. If you damage the hippocampus, memories vanish. If the physical brain determines who we are, what is left to go to heaven? If a purely physical disease like Alzheimer's can dismantle a personality while the person is still alive, it suggests that the self is a biological process, not a ghostly passenger. That biology brings us to evolution. Evolution is a fact of biology, supported by mountains of DNA evidence and the fossil record. But it poses a fatal problem for the Christian narrative, specifically, original sin. The story says that humans fell from perfection. Adam and Eve sinned, and death entered the world. But evolution tells us that death has been here for billions of years before humans arrived. Death is the engine of evolution. Without death, natural selection doesn't work. Humans didn't fall from perfection. We rose from simpler primates. We were never perfect. We were never in a garden. If there was no Adam, there was no original sin. If there is no original sin, there is no need for a Savior to redeem it. The entire theological house of cards rests on a mythology that biology has disproven. Then there is the issue of prophecies, specifically the failed ones. Jesus himself is recorded in the Gospels saying that he would return quickly. He told his disciples, "Truly I tell you, this generation will not pass away until all these things have taken place." He was speaking to people, standing right in front of him. He was predicting an imminent apocalypse. But that generation passed away. And the next one. And 20 centuries of them. The early church was structured around the idea that the end was days away. That is why Paul told people not to get married. They were wrong. The prophecy failed. Reinterpreting this generation to mean something metaphorical is just moving the goalposts to save the text from its own error. We must also ask why the miracles stopped. In the ancient world, God was constantly parting seas, stopping the sun in the sky, raising the dead, and sending bears to maul children who mocked a prophet. These were big, visible, physics-breaking events. Now that everyone carries a high-definition camera in their pocket, the miracles have shrunk. Now a miracle is finding your car keys or a cancer going into remission after chemotherapy. Why does God become shyer as our ability to document reality improves? The most logical answer is that the big miracles never happened. They were legends that grew in the telling, in an age before fact-checking. Consider the diversity of the religion itself. There are thousands of denominations of Christianity. They disagree on baptism, on salvation, on the nature of hell, on gay marriage, on female leadership. They all read the same book. They all pray to the same Spirit for guidance. If the Holy Spirit is guiding believers into truth, why does He guide the Baptist to one conclusion and the Catholic to the opposite one? They can't both be right. This confusion suggests that there is no guiding signal, only humans projecting their own cultural biases onto a text that is vague enough to support any argument. Let's look at the free will defense again, but deeper. We are told God knows everything, past, present, and future. He knows the end from the beginning. That means before He created you, He knew exactly what choices you would make. He knew if you would reject Him. He knew if you would end up in hell. And He created you anyway. In that scenario, you do not have free will. You are playing out a script that was written before you were born. A robot programmed to walk off a cliff doesn't have the freedom to not walk off the cliff. If God creates a person knowing for a fact they will suffer eternally, God is the author of that suffering, not the person. There is also the problem of God's shifting personality. In the Old Testament, God commands genocide. He orders the Israelites to kill the Amalekites, men, women, children, and infants. He kills the firstborn of Egypt. He drowns the entire world in a flood. He is a warrior God of a specific tribe. In the New Testament, suddenly the message is, turn the other cheek and love your enemies. Christians say this is a progressive revelation, that God was meeting people where they were. But does a perfect, unchanging moral being ever need to order the slaughter of infants? That doesn't sound like a higher morality. It sounds like the projected warfare of a Bronze Age tribe, justifying their land grabs by claiming their God told them to do it. We should also question the sheer inefficiency of the plan. The universe is 13.8 billion years old. Humans have only been here for a blink of an eye. If the universe was created for us, why is it 99.9999% empty, lethal radiation and cold vacuum? And why did God wait hundreds of thousands of years of human history, where people lived, suffered, and died in ignorance, before sending Jesus to a small patch of desert in the Middle East? Why not appear to everyone, everywhere, all at once? Why rely on a game of telephone spanning thousands of years? It is the most inefficient, fragile method of communication imaginable, indistinguishable from a local cult getting lucky and spreading through an empire. We have to ask about the utility of faith itself. We are told faith is a way of knowing. I just know in my heart. But faith is not a pathway to truth. You can have faith that the earth is flat. You can have faith that Elvis is alive. You can have faith in Shiva or Allah. Faith is simply the excuse people give when they don't have a good reason. If you had evidence, you wouldn't need faith. You would just have the facts. Elevating faith to a virtue is a defense mechanism. It protects ideas that cannot survive on their own merit. There is also the argument from non-belief. If God exists and wants us to know Him, He knows exactly what evidence it would take to convince you. He knows the specific threshold of proof your brain requires. He is capable of providing it. He has not provided it. Therefore, either He doesn't want you to know Him, or He doesn't exist. The fact that reasonable, moral, intelligent people can honestly search for God and find nothing is a devastating blow to the idea of a loving God who wants to be found. Finally, we have to address the fear of hell, the fear of losing community, the fear of meaninglessness. This is what keeps the system running. It isn't love. It's a hostage situation. Love me, or I will burn you. Believe this, or you will lose your purpose. But when you step outside the framework, you realize that meaning isn't something you receive from a dictator in the sky. It is something you create. Morality isn't about obeying arbitrary rules. It's about empathy and reducing suffering, because we are all in this together. These questions aren't designed to be mean. They are designed to be honest. And honesty is the only thing that can truly set us free. The world is far more beautiful and far more precious when we realize that this life is the only one we have, and we are the only ones here to help each other. We don't need a deity to be good. We don't need a myth to have purpose. We just need to open our eyes and look at reality as it actually is. And when we strip away the fear, we are left with a very simple, very human question. Why do you dismiss every other? God in history, but keep this one? Think about the thousands of deities that humanity has worshipped. Zeus, Thor, Osiris, Ra, Gilgamesh. If you are a Christian, you look at the stories of Apollo pulling the sun across the sky, and you instantly recognize them as myths. You know they are cultural inventions used to explain natural phenomena before we understood physics. You are an atheist regarding Zeus. You are an atheist regarding Shiva. You understand exactly how a religion can be false, how a holy book can be fiction, and how millions of people can be wrong. We just take that understanding and apply it to one more God. The reasons you dismiss the Norse pantheon are the exact same reasons we dismiss the biblical one. Lack of evidence, reliance on magic, and the clear fingerprints of human authorship. It becomes even more difficult to defend when we look at the specific mechanism of salvation, the very core of the gospel. The idea is that blood sacrifice is required to appease the anger of the deity. This is a concept rooted in primitive superstition. In the ancient world, if the harvest failed or a volcano erupted, people assumed the gods were angry, and the only way to calm them was to kill something: a goat, a bull, or sometimes a child. Blood for favor. Christianity didn't invent this. It absorbed it. The crucifixion is just the ultimate version of human sacrifice. We are asked to believe that the supreme intelligence of the universe could not simply forgive. He couldn't just say, "I forgive you." He required a blood payment. He had to torture and kill his own son, to find a loophole in his own rules to allow him to love the people he created. That isn't high morality. That is Bronze Age logic. If a human judge said, "I cannot forgive this speeding ticket until someone kills a puppy in the courtroom," we would deem them insane. Yet we call this theology beautiful. This brings us to the concept of vicarious redemption, the idea that you can transfer your moral failings to someone else. It is actually a deeply immoral concept. If you commit a crime, you are responsible. If you hurt someone, you should make amends. You cannot have someone else serve your prison sentence while you walk free. That is not justice. That is a miscarriage of justice. The idea that you can wash away a lifetime of bad behavior by telepathically accepting a human sacrifice that happened 2,000 years ago removes personal accountability. It allows people to feel clean without actually doing the work of fixing what they broke. It turns morality into a transaction rather than a transformation. We also have to scrutinize the character of the perfect being by looking at what he prioritizes. In the Old Testament, there are 613 commandments. There are strict laws about not mixing fabrics, not eating shellfish, and how to trim your beard. There are repeated intense commands about how to worship properly, but there is no command explicitly banning domestic violence. There is no command banning the rape of a spouse. There is no command against child abuse. If this book was written by the author of morality, why does he seem so obsessed with dietary restrictions and ritual purity, but silent on the actual issues that cause the most human suffering? It reflects the priorities of ancient priests who wanted control and order, not a loving father concerned with the safety of the vulnerable. This silence becomes deafening when we look at the history of science. This is often called the God of the gaps. Throughout history, God has always lived in the shadows of what we didn't understand. When we didn't know what caused lightning, it was God. When we didn't understand germs, plagues were God's judgment. When we didn't understand neurology, seizures were demonic possession. But as science shines a light into the dark corners, God has nowhere left to stand. We found the cause of lightning, its electricity. We found the cause of plague, its bacteria. We found the cause of seizures, its misfiring neurons. In every single instance where a supernatural explanation has gone head-to-head with a natural explanation, the natural one has won. 0 exceptions. God is a receding pocket of scientific ignorance, and that pocket is getting very small. And what about the nature of spiritual experiences? This is the bedrock for many people. They have felt the presence of God. They have felt a rush of peace during worship, or a sudden clarity in prayer. We don't deny those feelings are real, but we deny the cause. Neuroscience can replicate these states. We know that group singing releases oxytocin and dopamine. We know that sensory deprivation or intense emotional priming can induce hallucinations or feelings of euphoria. We see this exact same phenomenon in every religion. A Muslim feels the presence of Allah during the Hajj. A Hindu feels the presence of Krishna during a puja. A secular music fan feels transcendence at a rock concert. If the feeling is universal across mutually exclusive beliefs, then the feeling is a product of human biology, not a validator of Christian truth. It proves you have a brain, not that you have a soul. Let's dig deeper into the origins of the God character himself. Most believers assume Yahweh was always the one, singular God. But archaeology tells a different story. In the earliest layers of the text and the archaeological record, Yahweh was just one god among many in the Canaanite pantheon. He was a storm warrior god. He had a father, El. He even had a wife, Asherah, whose statues were found all over ancient Israel before they were purged by later religious reforms. The monotheism we see today wasn't a revelation. It was a political evolution. The Israelites gradually promoted their tribal war god to the head of the table, and then deleted the other gods from the roster. When you read the Bible with this knowledge, you can see the scars of this editing process, verses where God speaks in the plural, or refers to other gods as real rivals rather than imaginary statues. You are worshiping a survivor of a prehistoric deity war, evolved and sanitized over centuries. We must also confront the fine-tuning argument, the idea that the universe is so perfect for life that it must have been designed. This is a classic logical error. It's like a puddle waking up one morning and thinking, "This hole I'm in fits me perfectly. It follows my curves exactly. It must have been designed just for me." The puddle doesn't realize that it fits the hole because it adapted to the container. The container wasn't built for the water. We evolved to fit the conditions of this planet. If the conditions were different, we would be different, or we wouldn't be here to ask the question. And when we look at the universe, it isn't fine-tuned for life. It is fine-tuned for black holes and dead rocks. Life is a rare, fragile mold growing on the wet skin of a single apple in a warehouse full of sterile dust. That does not look like a specifically designed nursery for humans. Consider the narrative of the resurrection itself. We are told to stake our eternal souls on this event. But the evidence for it is astonishingly weak. We have no contemporary accounts. Zero. No Roman historian, no Jewish scribe, no one writing in the year 30 or 33 AD mentions a man rising from the dead, earthquakes, and the sky turning dark. The first written accounts come decades later, from anonymous authors living in different lands, and the story grows with each telling. Mark, the earliest gospel, ends abruptly with the women fleeing the tomb in fear, telling no one, no appearances of Jesus. Later, Matthew adds an earthquake and zombies walking around Jerusalem. Luke and John add more details, more speeches, more physical interactions. This is exactly how legends develop. If you tried to convict someone of a crime today, using inconsistent anonymous testimony, written 40 years after the fact, by friends of the defendant, the case would be thrown out of court. Yet we accept it as absolute truth. And then there is the problem of hell's geography, or rather the chronology of hell. The modern Christian view of hell, eternal fire, demons, torture, is not in the Old Testament. The Jewish people, the very people God supposedly revealed himself to, did not believe in it. They believed in Sheol, a gray, dusty place where everyone went, good or bad, a place of sleep. The concept of fiery torture was imported later, influenced by Greek concepts of Tartarus and Zoroastrianism. If hell is real, and it is the most important danger facing humanity, why did God wait thousands of years to mention it? Why did he let Abraham, Moses, and David live and die without ever warning them about the eternal fire? It looks suspicious, like a theology that got meaner over time to control people more effectively. We have to talk about the personal relationship paradox. Christians claim to have a personal relationship with Jesus, but let's be honest about the mechanics of that relationship. You speak to him, and he replies through your own internal monologue, or through signs that you interpret. If you have a difficult decision to make, you pray, and then you do what you feel is right. If it works out, God guided you. If it doesn't, God is teaching you a lesson. This is a self-sealing loop. There is no external feedback. You are indistinguishable from a person talking to themselves and attributing the wiser voice in their head to an external source. It's a simulation of a relationship, lacking the one thing that makes relationships real: interaction with a separate, distinct consciousness that can tell you things you didn't already know. This leads to the question of intellectual honesty and the doubting Thomas scenario. In the story, Thomas refused to believe until he saw the wounds. Jesus gives him the proof, but then says, "Blessed are those who have not seen, and yet have believed." This single verse has done more damage to critical thinking than almost any other. It trains believers to think that credulity is a virtue. It elevates gullibility to a spiritual status. But in every other aspect of life, believing without seeing is a recipe for being scammed. Why would a God who gave us the ability to reason, to doubt, to investigate, want us to shut off those faculties when it comes to the most important question of existence? It suggests that the system cannot survive scrutiny, so it demonizes the scrutiny. We also have to ask about the cures for sin. Why is the geography of miracles so specific? God seems very good at curing things that can naturally go into remission: back pain, cancer, headaches. He never regenerates a lost limb. We have thousands of returning veterans with missing legs and arms. They pray with just as much faith as anyone else. Why does God hate amputees? Why is there a distinct line in biology that prayer never crosses? The answer is uncomfortable but obvious. God only heals conditions where the natural rate of recovery is non-zero. He never does the impossible, only the improbable. This is exactly what we would expect if prayer were a placebo and not a power. Consider the implications of the fall of man. The theology says we are broken, sinful, and depraved by nature. This is a psychological poison. It teaches children that they are fundamentally bad before they have even done anything. It creates a disease so it can sell you the cure. It undermines human self-worth and creates a dependency on the church for validation. You are worthy, but only through Him. It is the classic abusive tactic of breaking someone down so they can't leave. But when you look at humanity, we aren't depraved. We are a social species capable of immense kindness, altruism, and cooperation. We built civilizations, cured diseases, and created art, not because we were afraid of hell, but because we are human. We don't need to be saved from ourselves. We need to be empowered to be ourselves. And finally, we have to look at the silence of the universe regarding our specific cultural taboos. The Bible is obsessed with sexuality, virginity, purity, specific orientations. But the universe is vast and indifferent. Animals engage in all forms of sexual behavior, including homosexuality, in thousands of species. It is natural. The stars burn without caring who we sleep with. The obsession with policing human sexuality is a hallmark of human tribal control, not cosmic necessity. It's about managing inheritance, population, and power. To project these Bronze Age social anxieties onto the creator of the cosmos is to make God incredibly small, a cosmic voyeur peeking into bedrooms. When you step back and look at the whole structure, the contradictions, the failed prophecies, the scientific errors, the moral atrocities, the psychological manipulation, the image resolves. It isn't a picture of a divine kingdom. It is a picture of humanity desperately trying to make sense of a frightening world, projecting our own fears, hopes, and biases onto the sky. We created God in our image, and once you see that, you can't unsee it. The silence of the universe isn't a test, it's just silence. And that silence is an invitation to stop looking up for answers and start looking around at the only people who can actually hear us: each other.